Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into some seriously fascinating research that uncovers a massive secret about language learning. We're going to explore exactly why achieving true, effortless fluency requires so much more than just having perfect grammar. So stick around, because by the time we wrap up, you're going to have a completely new toolkit for tackling any language. I want you to really think about this for a second. Why is it that you can have absolutely flawless grammar, you can memorize literally all the vocabulary, and yet the second you step off the plane in a foreign country, you still manage to sound, well, totally awkward? Or even worse, you accidentally offend someone. It really taps into this universal fear we all share, right? That accidental rudeness in cross-cultural communication. Well, the answer to all that awkwardness lies in something linguists call pragmatic competence. Essentially, this is the hidden rulebook of social interaction. It's that complex, multi-part mapping of linguistic form, meaning, force, and the actual context of use. Basically, to put it simply, it's where the literal dictionary words you use crash right into your actual intention as a speaker, all dictated by the specific social situation you happen to be in. Okay, let's look at a really common example. Imagine you walk into a room and you say, "It's dark in here." Now, on a strictly literal level, sure, you're just making a factual observation about the brightness level of the room, but your actual intention? That's almost certainly a request, like, "Hey, please turn on the light." Understanding that subtle difference and knowing exactly when to use it, that is pragmatic competence in action. And this brings us right to the classroom pragmatics problem. Traditional language classrooms systematically fail at teaching these hidden rules. Just think back to your old language classes. Grammar appears super systematically, right? Week 1 is present tense, week 2 is past tense, and so on. But pragmatics, it's usually only addressed entirely at random, usually just if a student happens to ask a specific question, which, as you can guess, leaves students with incredibly poor opportunities for any actual pragmatic development. To show you how to actually overcome this trap, I want to introduce you to our case study protagonist from the research. Meet Mitsu. Mitsu was a Japanese English as a second language student who was studying at an English medium university. Now, at the beginning of this study, Mitsu was really struggling. When researchers tested him, he consistently failed at producing appropriate formal speech. He was just entirely missing those hidden social rules. But then, Mitsu experienced what we can basically call his inciting incident. He was at a student debate conference, and a senior student dropped this incredibly harsh truth on him. They said, "Very few Japanese students can speak proper, appropriate English in professional business meetings." Ouch, right? That definitely stung. But instead of getting discouraged, that single blunt comment sparked Mitsu's absolute obsession with mastering situationally appropriate language. He basically decided right then and there he was going to figure out these hidden rules. And this perfectly illustrates Mitsu's incredible progress just a single semester later. Just listen to the difference in how he makes requests. To a friend, he's super direct and casual. "Hey Ken, I forgot my pen, can I use yours?" But when he's asking a professor for a deadline extension, he completely shifts gears. "I'm afraid I need 2 extra days. Is it possible to put off my deadline?" See that? It is carefully mitigated, it's highly polite, and it perfectly matches the power dynamic of the situation. Later on, the researchers actually sat down with Mitsu and asked him how he knew to do this. And his response is just amazing. He told them, "I decided to use 'I'm afraid' because it conveys a regret and it's politer than I think." This quote right here demonstrates this deep, incredible socio-pragmatic awareness. He isn't just randomly memorizing phrases anymore, he is consciously evaluating different language forms, measuring their exact politeness cost, and deploying them highly strategically. Mitsu was essentially hacking his own learning process, and what researchers noticed is that what Mitsu was doing naturally actually maps perfectly onto this really well-known academic framework called Oxford's Strategic Self-Regulation Model, or S2R for short. Basically, this model explains exactly how learners can actively and constructively manage their own learning process. It breaks everything down into a few specific types of strategies. Let's start with the first pillar of this model. These are the metacognitive strategies. Think of these as the construction manager of your learning. Now, they don't do the actual building themselves, but they oversee the whole shebang. They help learners focus, plan out their approach, obtain the right resources, and then constantly monitor and evaluate the construction of their second language knowledge. The second pillar involves meta-affective strategies. Let's be honest, learning a language is intensely emotional, right? It can be super frustrating and sometimes downright embarrassing. Well, these strategies help learners become aware of and actually manage their emotions, their attitudes, and their overall motivation during the learning process. It's all about keeping yourself in a positive headspace so you don't just completely give up the first time you make a cultural faux pas. The final meta strategy is the meta-sociocultural or interactive strategy. This is what empowers learners to actively manage contexts, communication, and culture. It basically acts as your guide for how you handle cultural expectations and how you actually go about interacting with native speakers or the target culture community out in the real world. So the big question, how do we actually put these metacognitive tactics into action, just like Mitsu did? First up, start paying close attention to form-function connections. Notice how people ask for things, not just what they're asking for. Second, act as an amateur ethnographer. Basically, observe the culture around you like a scientist. If you aren't living in the country, use TV, movies, and subtitles to watch for those subtle nonverbal cues and social dynamics. You can also engage in computer-mediated communication, things like Skype or reading local blogs to practice. And crucially, always monitor and evaluate your listeners' reactions. Did they wince slightly when you said that? Make a mental note. To really see how this builds up your ethnographic skills, let's consider two identical requests for a signature. A bank teller might routinely say something like, "Sign here, please." But if you were interrupting a busy professor in their office, you'd likely say, "Could I have your signature here?" By acting as an ethnographer, you start noticing these contextual cues. A bank transaction is routine, it's low imposition. But interrupting a professor? That's a high imposition. Your language absolutely must reflect that context. All right, so once your metacognitive construction manager has a solid plan, it's time to bring in the construction workers. These are the cognitive strategies. These are the strategies that help the learner actually construct, transform, and apply the second language knowledge they're taking in. This right here is where the heavy lifting of learning actually happens. And here is the really crucial point. As an adult learner, you are not starting from scratch. You actually have a secret weapon up your sleeve. When it comes to activating knowledge, you already have this incredibly rich foundation of universal pragmatic rules from your own native language. You already have implicit knowledge of politeness, of face saving, of knowing how to read a room. You don't need to relearn how to be polite. You just need to map those native concepts directly onto your new target language. We can actually connect these academic cognitive strategies directly back to Mitsu's incredibly successful habits. For deductive reasoning, Mitsu took a rule he learned, like using "I'm afraid" to soften a disagreement, and he consciously applied it in a live debate. For inductive reasoning, he acted like a detective, extracting entirely new social rules just from phrases in movies. And for conceptualizing details, he actively categorized dictionary usage notes, literally marking down which words were formal and which were casual. So, what was the actual result of all this strategic, highly self-directed learning? Well, over the course of the study, the average score increase for the entire group of 48 students was a mere 0.3 points. But Mitsu, through his own self-directed strategies, he achieved a perfect score, making a gain that was nearly a full 1 point higher than the average group gain. He vastly outperformed all of his peers, and he did it not by studying grammar harder, but by studying pragmatics smarter. And that brings us to the end of our explainer today. The hidden rules of language are out there, literally everywhere, just waiting for you to discover them. You just can't rely entirely on textbooks to do the heavy lifting for you. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to take into your own language learning journey. How are you going to act as an amateur ethnographer in your very next conversation? Pay attention, be strategic, and just watch how your fluency transforms. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer, and I'll catch you next time.